Right now, I want to welcome to the program the Chief Communications Officer of Safari Club International, Dr. Larry Rudolph. Dr. Rudolph, thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program tonight.
Hey, it's my pleasure. How are you?
Excellent. Glad you could join us. Last week there was a team at Berkeley led by a former climate change skeptic who released a study of global temperatures. Professor Richard Mueller put together a graph of the data supposedly showing warming from 1800 through 1975, and then a bigger increase in temperatures that appears to be continuing to go up and up and up. Interestingly enough, it looks like when you really examine the data, what you find is that no warming has occurred over the past 11 years all around the globe. And I bring this up because up in Canada, the polar bear has been placed on the endangered species list for Americans precisely because of these claims of global warming. Groups like the Center for Biological Diversity have said that the polar bear, while the population is not endangered and the population is not even threatened at this point in time, because of the dangers that global warming causes and the dangers that global warming will present to these polar bears, we've got to protect them now. So it looks like, first of all, no, it's not actually getting any warmer up there in the Arctic. And then secondly, Dr. Rudolph, there are real problems, it turns out, with this report that prompted the polar bear being placed on the endangered species list to begin with.
Well, you're absolutely right. This uncertain climate change science is completely controversial, and there's a tremendous amount of debate over what is valid and what is invalid. So to place a species on a threatened list or possibly endangered list on this uncertain climate change science is completely biased and, in my opinion, not worthy of consideration at this point.
All right. You've got right now the Office of Inspector General at the U.S. Department of the Interior that's investigating the veracity of this Center for Biological Diversity report that ended up helping to put the polar bear on the endangered species list. Don Serber, writing for the Daily Mail in West Virginia, said that this report in 2006 from American wildlife researchers Jeffrey Gleason and Charles Monnet talked about dead bears floating in the Arctic Ocean in 2004, apparently drowned, and focused attention on the vulnerability of the animals to the melting of the Arctic ice, which they need for hunting. Widespread references made to the dead bears. They figured in the film An Inconvenient Truth, made by Al Gore to highlight the risks of global warming. And as it turns out, Jeffrey Gleason, one of these studies' authors, is an avian biologist. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I believe avian refers to birds, not bears, right?
Correct.
Okay. And Charles Monnet, the other individual, the government actually suspended him from his job as an Arctic wildlife biologist at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation, and Enforcement. He's since returned to work. But now there's all kinds of questions about the truthfulness of this report that was used back in 2006. I mean, like, for instance, Jeffrey Gleason was asked at one point, when you took the pictures of the dead bears, were you able to tell what they were? And he said, most of the time, yeah. We saw some dead polar bears at one time, and it was pretty obvious with the naked eye what it was. But the pictures, they just kind of turned out to be a white blob in the photos. And I can't remember, we probably took 3 or 4 pictures, and it's sort of a white blob floating in the ocean, so it's pretty hard to tell. So, Dr. Rudolph, did we really put the polar bear on the endangered species list because some guy took pictures of a white blob in the middle of the ocean and said, all right, it's good enough for me?
Well, of course not, because, again, this is based on to a degree, a biased information on uncertain climate change. We're talking about putting a species on the endangered species list because within 45 years it may be endangered. I mean, you just said the right thing. 3 or 4 pictures that have now proven to be basically, how do we say this? The veracity is questionable.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what other white blobs might be floating around the Arctic Ocean.
Well, let's remember, polar bears have historically been seen 20 to 30 miles off the polar ice swimming. That's what they do. So it's not like they're out there drowning, according to his article. That's just not accurate.
All right, so where does this stand right now? I mean, I know that Safari Club International and the NRA have been involved in litigation to try to remove the protections. As we've said before, the placing of the polar bear on the endangered species list doesn't mean that fewer polar bears are going to be killed. It just means that, frankly, American hunters are not going to get the opportunity to travel to the Arctic Circle. The indigenous people in Nunavut are not going to be able to sell those tags to American hunters. They're losing money, but they're still going to kill those polar bears because they're the ones that get the tags in the first place, right?
You are completely correct. The mortality rate for the polar bear will not change at all. The local population in Nunavut will take those number of permits. I'm going to use just a rough number, say 40.
Yeah.
They're going to harvest those same 40 bears. But instead of that American hunter coming up there, and this is the most important thing, the American hunter who comes up and he spends the money that he does for the local bear, the local population, is seeking the oldest trophy male that he can. The local Inuit population will collect any bear. That's just typically how that's been done. Whether it's a female, a young bear, a cub, or an old male, they collect the bear. Now, that bear last year, on average, his skin went for about $3,000 U.S. for the value of his skin. No money then comes from the American hunter to the local population to preserve the animal, to put about $2,000 per hunter into the research for polar bear hunting and the research on the animal, plus American hunters only collect the oldest trophy male. So it's a lose-lose all the way around.
Well, and one other additional factor as well, it used to be when American hunters would go up there and they would take the polar bear, when they re-imported the animal, they would pay, in essence, a fee.
That's right, about $2,000. That's correct.
That went to research
yes, sir.
and protections for the polar bears.
That's gone now.
And
yes,
that's
sir.
gone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no change in the mortality rate. This is nothing but a negative impact on the long-term preservation of this magnificent species.
That is, wow. So is there any hope that this can change? I mean, what is the Department of the Interior doing, if anything, and what's the status of the litigation?
Well, it's ongoing. There are many, many counter lawsuits against this process, and at the end of the day, Safari Club International is doing its very best to present sound science to the benefit of the preservation of the polar bear. Politicians cannot make a rule at the end of the day to overrule sound science. That's what Safari Club International is fighting to protect.
All right. Well, listen, Dr. Rudolph, really appreciate you joining us tonight, and hope we can do this again very soon.
Hey, I look forward to it. Thanks for everything you do, and have a good evening.
Thanks. You too. Dr. Larry Rudolph joining us from Safari Club International.